Bama took care of business against Tennessee. They win for the 16th time in 17 tries against the Vols. Everybody smoked cigars. Great second half for the Crimson Tide. Chad Anderson and I are going to break it down. We're going to talk about everything that happened yesterday. Where's Alabama in the top 10? Where's Alabama in the top 25? Where are they in the standings? We're going to get into that. Off week coming up, then LSU. How did we grade the first half of the season? More than the first half. We'll get into that as well. But great day to have you guys on the show. And if you're not part of Bama Tailgate Daily, it's easy to be part of it. Here's your invitation. And this is an invitation that is free to the party, to the tailgate show, right on the quad where we were yesterday. Like, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Roll Tide, everybody. Thanks for being here. He's Chad Anderson, and I'm Mick Gillispie. Chad, it was quite a night in Tuscaloosa. Still kind of taking it all in, if you will. But what a great victory for the Crimson Tide. I got one of my very festive Hawaiian shirts on, and I'm still on cloud nine, man. What a great win.
Yeah, it was. I'm gonna keep chewing for a little bit, Mick. All right, I keep going. It was great. I mean, I feel like I got hit by a truck yesterday, but I woke up today. I was still kind of enjoying some of this on my walk through the neighborhood. So, man, it was again when we talked about it a little bit on the post game show. That was a game where you look back and we've said it before. This team, this is just who they are. They hang in there. The defense keeps them in games, and the defense deserves so much credit from yesterday's game. I mean, so much credit because they gave up the opening drive, but after they gave that up, the offense put them in weird spots, tough spots, and the first half, the defense gave up 275 yards total, and that was a little bit alarming. But then in the second half, they completely shut Tennessee down. I think Tennessee, before the final two possessions, which Alabama was playing a little more prevent and keep everything in front of you, don't give up the big play, get the clock moving. That defense had only given up, I believe, 47 yards at that point in the second half. So credit to them. The good news is this team still hasn't played a complete game, which is annoying, but also scary, I would think, for opponents.
Right.
And this team is 7-1 in the driver's seat. The LSU game in 13 days is probably for the SEC West, and Alabama's in the driver's seat going into the month of November, which is where Nick Saban every single year somehow has his football team when he's at Alabama. And it's like I said, yesterday was annoying. But then the second half, just relishing in how they played, how they performed, how they came back, and watching the tears from everybody in orange yesterday and morning. And this morning. It's Twitter has been chef's kiss this morning online. It's been fantastic.
What are they saying? They didn't get a lot of help from the officials yesterday. But I don't think they threw it on. They didn't throw it like what we saw last year. But the officials didn't win or lose that game. It's not like they had an interception with the lead late in the game and a guy 30 yards down the field with the football gets a flag thrown. Their quarterback didn't get hit twice. It should have been personal foul penalties, maybe even get kicked out of a game, and they don't even call. They don't even penalize them. But there were a couple calls. One of the holding calls in particular. I mean, it's hard to tell from the camera angles, but I'm sure that's a big part of it.
Yeah. But that's the thing. There was nothing egregious,
Yeah, right.
And
it wasn't egregious. Yeah.
And it's really easy to go back as a fan and go still frame on everything and say, well, look at this and look at this and look at this. But you could do it the other way too. I mean, where was the targeting or the unnecessary roughness and ejection when Roydell Williams gets hit in the head with a forearm?
Yeah, that's true. You know what? That's a good point.
And I understand
that for a cheap shot.
Yeah, and I understand. I really believe the defender was going in with the attitude of I'm going to try to punch this ball out, and Williams may or may not have been laying on the pile or laying on top of a defender. I'm going to go in there and try to punch the ball out, and he missed. But whether you missed or not, it was still a forearm to the helmet, and he's a
Yeah.
defenseless player. So there's just different things like that where you could always point and get ticky tack and whatnot. But hey, I didn't hear much bitching a year ago when there were 17 penalties on the Crimson
From
Tide.
those same
So
guys, yeah.
yeah,
I love the post-game show last night. Someone reminded me of a prank caller that we got from a 865 number calling themselves Peanut and just talking a gang of shit. Like, they deserved this. This was an ass whooping that they had coming. Like, LSU beat us last year and they ran out on the field and everything, but they didn't do the amount. And you would think about that. Think about that. That LSU talked less shit after a win.
yeah,
They were happy, but they weren't like, yelling in people's faces and just the amount of shit talk from them guys calling and pranking our show and stuff, like, just uncalled for. And then they got humbled. That second half was pure dominance. I mean, the entire game changed on the touchdown, the start, the second half, the second play. And all of a sudden, a hard fought 20-7 lead for them was 20-14. And from that point on, the crowd was loud. Fans, give yourselves credit. When we got to Alabama, a lot of the tickets were like kind of like old money seats. People that had them for a long time, and they would get mad if you stood and cheered.
yeah.
And those people don't need to go to these games. They go to see Chattanooga, go to see Kentucky and stuff. But these games, you give your tickets to your kids or somebody that's going to go in there and make noise. Because if you got a problem with somebody standing and watching the game and cheering, then you might as well watch it on television. That's the home field advantage.
It is. And I actually was hard on the fans because I think a lot of them kind of had that attitude, to be honest, early on yesterday. And when they were, especially when Tennessee was driving down the field and then the next possessions and in the first half, admittedly myself too, you sit there and you're just bracing, for, oh my God, is this what it's going to be like all afternoon? And it's brutal. And so, but the second half, that was insane. Nick Saban did something after the game I haven't seen him do before. And that was after his interviews, he was kind of headed to the tunnel and then he stopped and he actually jogged down to the student section and clapped and applauded and waved and gave him a thumbs up before he ever went back to the locker room, which is at the other end of the field. So I thought that was pretty cool. Saban knew and recognized, how much of an impact, especially in the second half, that the crowd made. But if you want to go back to penalties real quick, Mick. So I pulled this up because I was kind of curious based on yesterday. So Tennessee had 8 penalties, but they only had 8 penalties for 55 yards. So when you start breaking it down, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's less than 8 yards per penalty, which means you had a lot of pre-snap penalties. So Tennessee had a holding penalty early. Their second penalty was delay of game, where they were clapping.
Oh, yeah. And they deserved that one too. Yeah, that was obvious.
Like, that's not a judgment call. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, there are judgment calls and non-judgment calls. That's not a judgment call. That's your clapping as a linebacker. You can't do that. I don't care if that was your intent or not. You just can't do it. So out of their 8 penalties, that's one that was non-judgment. Then you've got offsides. That's 2. That's non-judgment. Offsides again. That's 3. Non-judgment. Holding. Okay. Judgment. So we're 3 out of 5. Holding. So that's 3 out of 6. But then you got false start. And then you got false start. So you had 8 penalties, but holy shit, Mick, 5 of them are not judgment calls.
Right. So they really only would have had 3 penalties.
Right. So it's self-inflicted. That's kind of like Alabama fans being pissed off at officials for the A&M game. And Alabama had 9 pre-snap penalties. Like,
right.
Those aren't judgment calls. Like, the referees are obligated to make that call. So,
Right.
3 penalties, 3 holding calls, 1 on the defense, 2 on the offense. I mean, that's not the difference in the game. You just got outcoached in the second half. You got your ass whipped.
Yeah. You got a good old-fashioned country ass whooping in the second half.
Yeah.
And your dynamic offense wasn't dynamic. But this is a different team than they had last year. But you know what? Joe Milton's not a bad quarterback. I mean, he made some big plays in the first half. But I still loved Chris Braswell's sack and Campbell's scoop and score. That was the highlight of the game for me. That was my Daniel Moore moment. If they did like a Daniel Moore print of that game.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people would buy the Braswell sack and Campbell scoop and score print, but if that to me was what it would be, like one of those split ones, like where like half of it is like Braswell smashing the quarterback. And I loved what Nick Saban said after the game. He was like, he goes, if he would have thrown it, we were going to intercept it. That's why he double clutched. Correct. Because they had that play defensed perfectly. And that's what Alabama's defense is able to do. Kevin Steele was the perfect guy to come in and take this defense. Yeah. I don't know if they wanted Golding to stay or he just got paid more money to go to Ole Miss and Alabama didn't match it. But I think as a fan base, we were ready to see him move on. And Alabama's lucky that they were able to get this guy to come in because this defense just looks the way that an Alabama defense is supposed to look.
Yeah, and pressure, a lot of pressure in the quarterback's face. But the thing with Joe Milton, and they're going to have the same issue with Jaden Daniels, is you got to respect the legs. And so a guy like Max Johnson, Alabama can attack him. It's not a big deal because you're not worried as much about his mobility. But when you're in a spot like a Milton, a Jaden Daniels, those guys can beat you on the ground. So you got to work on containment, and you'd rather say, hey, beat me through the air rather than beat me on the ground. Mm-hmm. Joe Milton, even though it was a short pass, it was one of his best passes of the entire season. Right before halftime when he hit his tight end for a touchdown. Alabama did the same thing they did against Ole Miss and Jackson Dart when it was 4th and 16. Bama brought the house. Everything straight up the gut, put pressure on Milton, make him backpedal, get him on his heels, and he did, but he lobbed a perfect pass over the top of Dallas Turner away from Caleb Downs, and he was able to hit his tight end on a floater going towards the side of the end zone. And the fact that he didn't rush that throw, was able to connect while backpedaling, that was a great pass. But I also love the defensive call because
me too. I said the same.
Yeah, if guys beat you with a good throw, they just beat you. But make them earn it. Don't let them sit back there and be comfortable and pick it apart and make your 4 or 5 guys in the secondary, cover somebody for 7 or 8 seconds. And that was a good defensive call and a great play by Milton.
Yeah, and we'll find out about Kevin Steele in this defense because their toughest task as a unit is coming up against LSU in 2 weeks, but we're not going to talk about that today. Just something that we'll be building towards the next 2 weeks. And but I just want to kind of keep recapping the Tennessee win because it was awesome. I mean, really, it was awesome, man. I don't remember the last time feeling this good about a win. What maybe the national championship game in 2020. But with COVID and everything else going on, it was just kind of a weird season. But this one felt fulfilling. Tuscaloosa was great. Had an awesome time there, hanging out and seeing everybody. We tailgated. We saw a lot of our friends. The weather was perfect. I got to give Tennessee fans credit. They came to my old fraternity house, KA house, and for the party there. One guy showed up wearing a coonskin cap, and it was like
Davy Crockett.
80. Yeah, it was like 80 degrees and really hot in the sun out there. And the guy showed up there with a coonskin cap on. I thought it was alumni weekend. I don't know whose relative he was, but he came in, and I mean, if you're gonna dress like that, then you got to own that. You know what I'm saying? You can't come in kind of half stepping it once you put the coonskin cap on,
Yeah.
and then another guy was there and he had like no shirt on and like checkered
The overalls.
coveralls. Yeah. And I was like, okay, you know what, man? These guys, like, Tennessee's bringing their people. Like, these are all the folks who were at last year's game and want to be like there for the streak to start, the streak that they thought might happen. Right.
Yeah.
They just got, but the second half of the ball game, that glass slipper that they were running with broke, and it just all came crumbling down. But I had fun. I like Tennessee. I like their fans. I love the rivalry. The colors are great. Their uniforms against our uniforms are as classic as college football.
Yeah.
No one, and you know what's cool about them? You know, there's a lot of crimson teams, but there's no one else that has that color orange that they wear. I think that's pretty cool. Even though it's I know for you it's not choice. An orange you can wear. You've said that it's not an, you called it disgusting. I get that. Okay.
Where else do you wear it?
Well, but it's so different. You said to me yesterday,
it's classic.
You go, how come there's no green teams in the SEC? Well, there was a green team,
a green
Tulane.
Wave. Yeah.
But then they made the dumbest decision of them and Georgia Tech jumping out of the SEC. Stupid. I would love to see Tulane come back. It would be cool to have New Orleans back in the mix. And I like have you seen their uniforms now? They're like that bluish
the wave
green.
Looks cool.
It looks really neat, like the new logo. But anyway, yeah. So first half of the ball game shows you how Alabama can get beat, though. You know, they were able to throw the ball on Alabama. They challenged them. They made the plays that they had to. They took advantage of the pace, how many plays they were getting in. You know, you said that the offense put them in a bad position. I felt like it was kind of like they threw the interception, but the interception was in the end zone.
No, right? It was Milroe's fumble.
Yeah, Milroe's fumble. Yeah, and that was a bad spot, and the defense did a good job of holding them to a field goal there. And think if they get a touchdown, I mean, you know, it's just that much more you got to cover in the second half. But
yeah,
you know, it's the question I have is this could go either way. Are they going to play an entire game like they played the first half, or can they play an entire game like they played the second half?
I think they're too talented, knock on wood, to play an entire game the way they played the first half. I just think the coaches are too good and the players are too talented to have 4 straight bad quarters in a big game. Mm-hmm. I think South Florida proves you can have an entire game that's bad, but you know, Jalen Milroe also didn't play against South Florida.
Right.
So I just don't know that this team, you know, it would be really hard. There's definitely more of an opportunity for them to play a complete game the way they played the second half versus playing an entire game the way they did in the first half. Because again, you got too many 4 and 5 stars on the field, too many athletes.
Somebody's going to do something.
Yeah, too many good coaches, too many players. I just don't see how that could happen in comparison to the flip side of the coin. So, yeah, when you look at this team, though, they still have so much to get better at. I mean, just it's amazing. You would think, too, the way the fan base talks about them, and honestly, as nervous as we get about them, too, a lot of times, Mick, but you would think that when you watch this team or listen or hear about this team or hear about people talk about this team, you would almost think that they're like 4-3, you know, 5-3,
right?
Something like that. And in reality, this team, you know, works their ass off and figures out ways to win. They've had a lot of adversity this year. Think about the Texas A&M game. Even, you know, we go back to that one. That was a game that Alabama, it was the opposite, where they dominated the game the whole day, but had to hold on till the very end.
Yeah.
And so they've kind of had it both ways.
Yeah.
So they've still just got so much to work on. You know, they still, a couple of their playmakers yesterday, Burton and Bond had a couple of big catches. Obviously with the 2 touchdowns, and then Burton on the one where he kind of had to reach back across his body to make the catch. That was huge to keep a drive alive.
Yeah.
But still nobody like sticks out. Like Tennessee yesterday, Squirrel White had 10 receptions over 100 yards. Alabama still just doesn't have right now that one person that you just automatically go to. Remember Julio Jones, of course, on the team.
Yeah.
Julio's a special player, but you
Right.
just always knew Julio was your guy.
Right.
Right. You know, and there were other players on the team. Like you had Marquise Mays as a receiver on that team.
Right.
You had a good running back. You had a couple of other pieces, but you had your standout guy.
Right.
And one thing that's just kind of interesting is Bama doesn't have still the standout guy on offense. Now that can be good or bad because you never know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
But
I was going to say that too.
Yeah, but they just don't. And last thing, and I'll let you continue on here with the rest of the schedule, but is that Alabama yesterday, even though the offensive line still needs work, they actually played pretty well yesterday. That's a really good defensive front that Tennessee has. You got to give them a lot of credit. Alabama only gave up 4 sacks. And I say only, but Alabama had been giving up 6, 6, 5 every game. And yesterday's game, one of those 4 sacks was on the final play of the first half when Milroe was going to throw a Hail Mary.
Yeah.
They just brought the safety or the corner. I forget which one, but they brought one guy so that they, forced the action, didn't let the receivers get down to where he could chuck it. And he had to take a sack going into the locker room. So really, they only gave up 3 sacks yesterday in normal formations or situations. So that's a huge credit to the offensive line that they were able to step up and kind of mitigate some of those problems they've had earlier in the year.
Yeah, there's not a lot of blowouts on that schedule. Middle Tennessee was a blowout. They obviously lost to Texas. The South Florida, not a blowout. Ole Miss, not a blowout. Mississippi State, a blowout. Texas A&M, not a blowout. Arkansas, not a blowout. And Tennessee, I guess more of a blowout, but not a blowout. It was close, into the fourth quarter. And it came down to the end. So but that's still the way that it is right now. Alabama is not going to dominate like they used to. No one is, because there's just a lot more parity. You can be a lesser coach and have some money behind you, and you're going to go out there and get players because of, being able to buy them. Here's the schedule for the second half. November starts with LSU, then Kentucky, at Kentucky, which is one I might go to on the road, and then versus Chattanooga, and then Auburn. So, 4 games left. These are all winnable games. These are all games, the Chattanooga game is more of a scrimmage. And then, but they're tough games. You got to go on the road for the final 2 games in the conference. And both of those teams are not having, Kentucky's okay. Auburn's having a bad year. They lost again, but it's Alabama and Auburn. If Alabama stays focused, though, and do the things that they need to do, they're going to be in the SEC championship game. But with this team, it's so week to week that you can't look ahead and go, well, when they beat LSU, when they beat Kentucky, they could lose to Kentucky, they could lose to Auburn, they could lose to LSU. So and I think that's where we are right now. It used to not be that way. It used to be, for Alabama, they're going to play the schedule and there's only 1 or 2 games that they could lose. Kind of like Georgia this year with the weak schedule that they're playing. It's worked out like that. But for Alabama, it just didn't matter. They were just so dominant. When you actually had like rules in place, and there's no rules, it's the Wild West now. So they've basically legalized cheating in amateur sports. But it is what it is, right? But when there was actually like a rule set, Alabama was that's why Alabama was so good, because Nick Saban develops players, he recruits, he's constantly recruiting, he teaches, he makes guys millionaires, multi-millionaires. You come to Alabama and you're going to succeed if you bring the talent, and if you can get out on that field, if you do the things that he asks you to do, you're going to make a lot of money. I think that the tough part now is dealing with middlemen, which is something that he said to Chris Lowe he doesn't like doing. I can't even imagine. Remember last year he had a player that wanted his girlfriend to get into law school. and he wanted some money, and they told him to get lost, allegedly, So, and he was on the offensive line. But you're right. The offensive line did better yesterday. The biggest complaint that I had yesterday, first off, the Seth McLaughlin and the bad snaps, I'm sick of it. I'm just sick of it. I don't know whose fault it is, but it's time for maybe wasn't it Dalcour? Didn't he used to snap?
I can't remember. Maybe.
I don't know, or
Brockermeyer,
whoever it is. The guy. If the guy can't hear, then and that could be an issue. Maybe he's got a hearing issue with the claps. I don't know, but the snap things, it's not going away. And then Kool-Aid McKinstry, if he doesn't want to catch punts, if he's lost his nerve on the punts, and I could see that happening, like a NASCAR driver, not wanting to ride in Talladega in the in the pack going 200 miles an hour. It's a very similar job. I mean, if you think about it, returning punts, then they've got to put somebody else back there. He's killing the team with field position. You want to talk about the offense with the field position? Kool-Aid McKinstry returning punts, and he was one of the best. I think the best in the league last year. He's one of the worst now because he doesn't catch the ball. He runs out of the way. It's either he's afraid of the contact or he's afraid to fumble. I don't know what it is. He just put him on defense and let somebody else do it. But it's apparent. And Alabama's probably going to address that this week because the two in that game, Saban was pretty fired up about it. But it's been something that I've noticed over the last few games. But the Tennessee game, he was killing the field position.
Yeah, there was one too that was late in the game.
Yeah.
Where he didn't come catch it at around the 18 or 19 yard line, I believe it was. And it rolled all the way down to the 3 and had Alabama pinned back. And that's when Alabama was trying to run out the clock. And I glanced over at the sideline when that happened, and Saban was just losing his mind, and for good reason, because that's a almost 20-yard field position flip there. And when you're trying to burn the clock, a lot of times you don't get first downs, especially against a good defensive front, because that the other team is going to run. They're going to force you to burn your timeouts. So you end up with that being bad. And then also Alabama did get 9 yards on the drive. In fact, McClellan almost got a first down for the Tide.
Yeah.
But since they didn't, they had to punt. And had he not gotten a little bit of space, I mean, Burnip is now punting out of his own end zone. He was anyway, but when you're backed up on the 3, I mean, you're really screwed at that point and trying to punt out of your end zone, because you could end up with a safety, a block punt, touchdown, all kinds of disastrous things. So you're spot on, Mick. I'm glad you brought them up. It's two things that have to be fixed, because again, those aren't like, oh, I'm looking for an explosive play from a receiver, or I need Milroe to make better throws or in tighter windows or something along those lines, or even go through his progressions better, whatever you want to say. Snapping the football is 101. Like, you can't be the center for the best program in college football history over the last 15 years, or over the last 15 years, not history. I'd say history anyway. You can't be the center for that program and not be able to just simply snap it to the quarterback in shotgun. Like, it also throws timing off. When Milroe is having to throw his right arm out and snag a snap one-handed, or if he's having to reach down too low or jump up or snag with his left hand or whatever, like, it screws everything up. It screws the timing up, his footwork up. If he's handing off or doing a read, McClellan may be coming across on the read a little bit sooner or later than what Milroe's expecting, because he had to deal with the snap. I mean, you just can't. And same with Kool-Aid. I love Kool-Aid. I think he's a really good defensive player on the corner, but and he'll play in the NFL one day. But same thing, man. Like, this is 101 stuff. If you can't be a punt return guy on a top tier national program and then be worried because 2 defenders are running at you, knowing they're going to tackle you. That's just part of the job. So yeah, those 2 things, you're spot on. That's got to get cleaned up. That's basic 101.
I think that Kool-Aid is a super talented player that is good enough to get by in college without having to work really hard. But he's going to have to really work on that stuff for the NFL.
Yeah.
Like, because at that level, at that league, you even if you're as talented as he is, you've got to put the work in. And from what I understand, still developing that trait, but he's so good it doesn't matter. But if he wants to be a star, and he's got the ability to be a superstar,
he does.
And I think we both love him, and the nickname's great. But the punch yesterday, awful.
There's one other thing that, I'm getting nitpicky because in the second half, the team did such a good job. But there's one other thing yesterday that just kind of bugged me, especially in the first half. Defense played great second half, but first half, I was honestly surprised because I talked about it a lot all week. I was surprised Alabama wasn't more physical out on the edges with the receivers because Tennessee, they still were able to sit back, throw, and had some separation, had open guys. And I'm not saying every player is going to be completely covered like a blanket on every throw, but I watched that a lot. And Alabama didn't play as much press coverage as I thought they would. I just really expected more of it. Second half, obviously they made some adjustments and had Milton a little more uneasy, but I was just surprised with that. I also wonder how healthy Malachi Moore was.
Yeah,
because
I thought so too.
He's an amazing guy in the secondary, but he was first game back from injury. And I just noticed he gave a lot of cushion, was playing somewhat soft. But then he also was targeted a lot. And you just don't see a guy like Malachi in that position a lot of times. A lot of times teams will dodge him a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I just wondered, I'm obviously not Steele or Saban, don't ever claim to be, but I just kind of wonder looking back at that, like, was something a little bit off still with him? And I was just shocked, to be honest, that Alabama didn't play a little more press. They did at times. They did with one or two guys here and there, but it just wasn't as physical as I expected.
Well, I think the good news is that although no one has ever confirmed it, I have felt like, and I'm not backing off of this, that Jalen Milroe had got hurt in practice going into that Texas A&M game, something with his leg, and he was running not the explosive Jalen Milroe that he can be, but he was running the football effectively this week. They had a lot more confidence in that. He wasn't so slow. And when he's the fastest guy on the field when he's healthy. So if I was right, which I don't know if I am or not, and I may never know, but I still think that he looked slow. He actually looked like he had picked up a step or two. So he's healing. And I bet you that going into the LSU game, he'll have that explosiveness again. If it's a hamstring or a calf or something like that, having a week where you kind of just can rest at that age, and as good as an athlete as he is, that's exciting, And I thought that him running the football really made a difference for Alabama yesterday. Big difference.
And actual designed runs.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he had one designed run down at the goal line. But then, he took off. He created a couple of times around midfield, picked up a first down on 3rd and long when coverage was tight by Tennessee secondary. So, huge props to him. A healthy Milroe. And that's his thing, right? Is he's developed more as a passer. His deep balls are amazing, but at the same time, his legs are what make him an even better quarterback. So that's where I'm really, looking forward to the month of November if he's healthy.
All right, let's talk about the top 25. I'm going to put it on the screen. We got the new top 25. This is a concern to me, and I know you have kind of been on the other side of this, but I'm concerned. I don't think that the SEC is getting the national props that they normally do. The AP has Texas and Oregon with one loss ahead of Alabama. Georgia's still number one. We need them to keep winning. Michigan dominant again, number two. Ohio State, they beat Penn State, which I knew they were going to do. They're number three. Florida State had an arm wrestling match for 3 quarters with Duke. They had better players. They won. Washington with Michael Penix Jr. They're number 5. Oklahoma, I think at some point they're going to lose, but they're number 7. I mean, number 6. I'll tell you what, Will Venables, though, has turned that completely around. And then Bama up 2 slots in the AP. They couldn't hold us down forever, up to number 9. And in the coaches, everything's all right over there, right? Alabama's only behind Texas in the one-loss department. So they're 8 and 9 in the 2 polls. And honestly, I guess it really doesn't matter who's behind Alabama at this point, Chad.
No, it doesn't. It also, there's still so many teams that are going to knock each other off that are in front of Alabama. So I continue to not worry. 12-1 SEC champion Alabama in the playoffs, no problem. I'm not worried at all about that. What was really interesting is yesterday, if you stayed up and watched some of the later games while you were enjoying your R&R victory cigar, Michigan continues to look just so good. Now they haven't played anyone, but they are at least dominating every single time they go out. They haven't had a slow game. Ohio State, they beat Penn State. It was a typical Penn State game, but Ohio State also, same kind of thing. Like their offense has really struggled. The 2 teams they've played this year, Notre Dame and Penn State, both good wins. I'm not discounting those wins. I'm just saying they're almost like Alabama to me. Their defense keeps them in games and plays extremely well at a high level, but their offense can't run away from other teams with good defenses. So Ohio State deserving of that spot, but there's just nothing like fearing about seeing them if you had them in the playoffs later. Florida State, they really struggled 3 quarters. Duke's much better, though. They're not just a basketball school. Riley Leonard missing a lot of action in that second half. I really wish he could have played. I don't know if, Mick, you were, I think, getting home about the time this was ending, but Washington, the Pac-12 bitches about how the East Coast doesn't see the late night Pac-12 after dark games. They ought to be thankful because Washington looked atrocious yesterday against Arizona State.
Yeah, Arizona. What was the score?
15-7.
Okay,
and it was 7-3 for a
Sam
Valente.
Time. Sam Valente, who's part of our site. He's one of the behind the scenes guys. Is an Arizona State student. So he was texting me last night, and he was like, "Hey, man, we call him Elvis. His name's Sam Elvis Valente, and so we call him Elvis. But anyway, yeah, he was like, I'm staying up. We got a big game against Washington. We're probably going to get blown out. So they hung in there.
They were. It was 7-3. I forget. I looked at it when I woke up, but I forgot the exact sequence of events. But it was a game into the 4th quarter, and that was a bad look for Washington.
Yeah. Well, you're kind of like I think you're like the captain of the Titanic. I mean, you're guiding this big ship. And you're like, oh, don't worry about it, guys. This ice will go right through it. I'm telling you, we have to be careful with these teams that are ahead of us. Alabama could be left out this year. The SEC could be left out.
Let's break it down real quick. Michigan, Ohio State, one of them loses, right?
But one of them could, if it's a close game.
No.
And there's a one loss.
No, because they will not have even won the division. They're not going to leave SEC champion Alabama out at 12-1 when one of them didn't win a division.
Okay, so put one of them in.
All right, so one's in, one's out. All right,
Florida State.
Georgia would be out because Bama would be in.
Right. Okay. I'm already having them out. Okay.
All right, so you got, let's just say it's Michigan. All right, we'll keep it simple. So Michigan would be in.
Yep.
All right, Florida State.
They went out.
All right, so they would be in.
Washington wins out.
Okay.
Or you know what? Maybe whoever wins the Pac-12 has one loss. So that could be Oregon. That could be Washington. Say they rematch and it's another epic game and Oregon wins. Or Washington goes undefeated. Either way, they're going to be in over Alabama. And then you got Oklahoma and Texas. If Oklahoma, that they could say, hey, Texas beat Alabama. And if Texas wins over Oklahoma, now all of a sudden you got Alabama and they're the 15th. That's why I'm telling you that you're too comfortable with this. There's 4 games left and 5 if you get to the SEC, if you get to your conference championship game. Now that's a lot of stuff has to go right for those teams. But if it comes down to the Pac-12, a 1-loss Oregon,
I still say no, because Alabama's loss in your scenario would be to Big 12 champion Texas, but Alabama's SEC champion would have beaten number 1 Georgia. I'm not saying Bama would be in over Texas because they would look at that head-to-head and Texas winning in Tuscaloosa, but I'm saying I think it would put Alabama in over a Pac-12 like an Oregon. Like if Oregon 8 right here beat 5 Washington to win the Pac-12, but 9 Alabama beat 1 Georgia to win the SEC, I would still have Alabama.
But what I'm telling you, Captain Chad, is that there's nothing guaranteed. This isn't the years where you're guaranteed.
Go undefeated.
Right. And that's what makes, and this is what makes college football and the regular season great. And this is what you're going to miss when all these teams get in. Because you have to pay attention. The next 5 weeks, right? For some teams, or 4 weeks for Alabama with the off date, we're going to be paying close attention to all these games. Yeah. You know, like Florida State. I would have loved to have seen Duke knock them off. We need somebody to beat Florida State and the ACC champ have a loss. And then that, to me, is the one where you get past them. Even though the ACC did well against the SEC this year, if Florida State loses and they don't have an undefeated champ, then I think Alabama's path is a lot easier, because it's going to be hard, even for me, as much as I love Alabama. When I see what's going on out in the Pac-12 this year, the final year of the Pac-12 as we know it, I see a lot of good football. Those games are fun to watch. Watching Oregon or Utah come from behind and kick a field goal, and that thriller to beat USC, great. Last week's Washington Oregon game was tremendous. You know, even some of the teams down the league this year, like Colorado, are like must-watch TV. So I would be hard if I was if I was just like some random, college football observer, to be objective and look at the SEC this year, which has a Georgia team that relies on a tight end to score. That's not that good. Good defense, but not great, even though they're number one. They're number one because they're back-to-back champions. You got a Tennessee team that was way better last year. They're good. You got an Alabama team that is not dominant. That's good and can be great. You got, this LSU team that's like a Globetrotters basketball team that scores a bunch of points but doesn't play defense. And there's not a lot of top 25 teams. Now, the win over Ole Miss keeps getting better.
Yeah, and the win over LSU would look good, because I would assume LSU is going to win the rest of their games.
Yeah, and you got to hope Tennessee doesn't fold up after that loss. They need to keep winning. I'd love them to stay in the top 25.
The one little black eye that Alabama's going to have is, and I agree with you from what you're saying today, right this minute, you're 100% right. But one problem is Ole Miss plays at Georgia. That's a really tough game, obviously.
Yeah.
So they're going to end up with at least 2 losses, you would assume.
Well, they might win that game. And let me tell you something. They could win that. They could win that.
They could, but you as a Bama fan, you got to hope. I said this. Now, this is
you got to hope Georgia wins that game.
You need Georgia undefeated. You do need Georgia undefeated.
Well, look, and Chad, I mean, I love your luxury liner. This is the unsinkable ship. I'm glad to be on here. You got awesome food and the band's fantastic and the views are great. But what I'm saying is just take it from a guy that's over here, just an observer. This isn't as clear cut as Captain Chad would want. Now, with that said, it always seems to kind of play itself out anyway.
I was going to say, can you put it back up real quick? I want to show everyone just a couple of things, because this is something that I also just don't worry about. And I get what you're saying, Mick. If it went exactly that way, like, okay, would there at least be an argument? Would you sweat a little bit? Yes.
I'm saying paths to get there is what I'm saying. And it's normally it's like paths to get there. It's all we got to do is win. Now, and this started with Robert from Mobile, a great caller to the postgame show for years, saying, hey, style points matter. And they do, like I'll tell you what, Alabama covering the spread against Tennessee to me was significant. The score looks a lot better when you covered the spread against a team like that. So the Arkansas game, when you back into the win, you kick their ass the whole game. They go and lose 7-3 the next week. It just doesn't look that good. That's all.
Well, I can't imagine, and I'll stand on this, even if it ran the way you're talking about, on our luxury liner, Mick, we're still having 5-course dinners, perfect moonlight dinners, perfect dancing, champagne, everything, because when you beat Georgia in my scenario, and Georgia's number 1, and it's the final weekend of the entire season, that's going to stick into the committee's minds. They're just not going to be able 12 hours later, 15 hours later to leave Alabama as a 12-1 SEC champion out of the playoff.
Right.
I just don't see it. And no matter what they want to say, too much weight is given to what you do in the final 2-3 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
It carries more significant weight. It just is what it is. It always has. And so if Bama does that now, I did say when Robert made that comment in that call that Bama does need Georgia to be number 1.
Yeah.
If Georgia slips against Florida in Jacksonville next week, against Ole Miss in Athens, or against Tennessee in Neyland, they slip, it's a problem. But if they're number 1 and Bama beats them, goes 12-1, still not worried.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. You're right. If Ole Miss beats Georgia, that all of a sudden changes. That makes it a lot tougher for Alabama. What I think the other thing is that what would help Alabama is that the Pac-12 just beat up on each other and start upsetting each other, which could happen. Mm-hmm. Oregon State.
I actually think that will happen.
Beat Oregon. Oregon State could beat Oregon. They're quietly.
Oregon State gets Washington and Corvallis.
Right. And they might. Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. And maybe they win that and they lose it, whatever. We need them to kind of start grinding each other up. Alabama's got to stay focused on winning football games, but it would suck to be the 5th team again this year.
Yeah.
It would suck.
It would.
That's all I'm saying. You guys, as you guys watch football, I need you to put the jinx on some of these teams for the Crimson Tide. All right, Chad, let's get together again this week and talk more of this Alabama football. I don't know that we start talking about LSU really until next week, but great to see you this weekend in person. Thanks for coming on the show. Roll Tide, all you guys that have hung out with us. You're invited to the tailgate party too. And we really appreciate you being part of the channel. We try to do a little something extra on Sundays because You know, as you're watching the NFL, I know you want to pop this up on your phone and relive all the magic. Could not have happened to a better group than that ass whooping they got in the second half. Roll, motherfucking Tide. Talk to you guys soon. And if you're not part of the tailgate, this is how you do it.